They set it at my own gate, with a truck idling at the curb and a locksmith stepping out behind them. "Mom's house is ours, Dad." My son's words were steady, like he'd practiced them. Rachel kept her eyes on the lock set in her hands as if the brass already belonged to them. They took one more step, and then saw the little metal plaque on the gate. A plain square, a short line of text, and a QR code no bigger than a postage stamp. They lifted their phones. The deed opened, and right there they froze. "I'm Henry Whitaker, 65, widower." For 39 years, I shared a roof with my wife, Margaret, in a big plain house that never tried to be anything it wasn't. We painted it ourselves, lost a battle with one crepe myrtle, won a war with a stubborn gutter, and watched our son, Mark, grow from scraped knees to a man with a deep laugh and decent shoulders. When cancer came for Margaret, it came quietly, like a draft under a door. And when she was gone, the house echoed. You never really hear how large your rooms are until you can't fill them with someone's voice. After the funeral, friends said I should keep myself busy. I tried. I mowed. I sorted. I learned how to cook eggs without ruining the pan. Mostly I ate toast. On Sundays, I opened Margaret's old recipe book, the one with flour fingerprints on the corners and little tabbed notes in her neat hand. Less sugar. Check at 18 minutes. Double for Mark. She always planned on paper, lists, labels, dates. She believed in writing things down so feelings couldn't blow them over. So, when Mark married Rachel, a bright young woman with energy like a spinning coin, I did what felt right. I told them to take the family house, fill it with noise and baby plans. I would move into a small condo 10 minutes away. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a trade I wanted to make. We put it in writing. They would cover my rent each month while they lived in the house. No drama, no speeches. Just a simple agreement between father and son so everybody could breathe. I remember the day I handed Mark the keys. He turned them in his palm like they were warm. "Dad, it's a lot." I said what fathers say when we mean both be happy and don't break anything. Make it yours with care. Rachel hugged me, light and quick, perfume like lemons. We took a photo on the porch. I went back inside alone and stood in the kitchen until the afternoon changed color. The condo fit me. One bedroom, sunlight across the table in the mornings, a grocery store you could walk to if you weren't in a hurry. I learned the names of the people at the front desk and the particular complaint of the elevator. On the first of each month, like clockwork, a notification pinged on my phone. Rent covered. I filed the receipts in a manila folder with a label in my own careful hand. Margaret would have been pleased. Somewhere around month 5, small things began to tilt. A message from Mark saying he'd send the rent tomorrow because something with the car came up. The next month, 2 tomorrows. On a Sunday, I stopped by the house with a tin of banana bread. Margaret's recipe, less sugar. Check at 18 minutes. And noticed a new rug rolled out where our old one used to be. A box by the door with a picture of a smart lock on the side. "We're getting organized," Rachel said, cheerful. "Making it ours." I smiled because fathers smile at that. On my way out, I brushed my fingers over the metal of the porch rail, cool in the shade. In the driveway, I put the empty tin on the passenger seat and sat for a minute. The condo elevator sighed when I came home, like it knew I was carrying a thought I didn't want to set down. That night, I opened Margaret's recipe book, and a scrap of paper slipped from between 2 pages. Her handwriting. "Write it, Henry. Not about ingredients. About a dentist appointment we almost forgot once. A plumber who promised Thursday and came Saturday. A reminder to ourselves that memory is soft, paper is firm." I took the folder with the rent receipts from the drawer and set it beside the book. When the 7th month's payment arrived late, I told myself not to make a mountain out of a molehill. When the 8th came days after, I put a date next to it in pencil. And when the 9th didn't come at all, I called Mark. He sounded tired, then defensive, then certain in a way that made my chest feel hollow. "Mom's house is ours, Dad," he said. "You don't have to keep treating it like a rental. We're a family." I let the silence hold for both of us. It wasn't the first time a son confused love with ownership. It won't be the last. After we hung up, I drove by the house at dusk. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see a painting Rachel must have chosen. Bright colors, big strokes. I stood at the gate and ran my thumb along the top bar where the paint had chipped years ago, remembering Margaret tapping my shoulder with a brush and saying, "We'll get to it." Write it down. The next morning I did. I wrote it down in the only place that matters for a roof. The record. A small metal plaque. 4 words and a code. Nothing flashy. Just enough for a man who keeps his promises and a gate that holds its line. We signed everything. 8 months later, the rent stopped. The first months were easy math. On the first, a ping on my phone. By noon, a receipt in the folder. I wrote the month in the corner in pencil, January, February, March, and slid each page behind the last. Mark texted photos of a freshly painted nursery that wasn't yet, a grill on the patio, a new doormat that said, "Welcome," as if the house needed reminding. Rachel's messages were bright and fast. "We'll host Easter this year, Dad. Send your favorite pie recipe." I sent a picture of Margaret's card with the butter stains and wrote, "Less sugar. Check at 18 minutes. On Saturdays, I drove over with small errands for myself, pruning shears I'd forgotten, the ladder they'd need for a high bulb, a tin of banana bread. Rachel stood in the doorway and said, "It feels like home," then caught herself and added, "Ours." She said it with the lightness of someone trying a word on in the mirror. I let it pass. Words settle on their own if you don't shove them. Around month 4, Rachel started talking about efficiency. "It might be simpler if we put utilities in our names," she said, flipping through a stack of mail. "And maintenance, too. Family doesn't nickel and dime family." She smiled to soften it. "You know what I mean." I did. I also knew efficiency has a habit of forgetting what it owes. I told her, sure, move the bills if it helps you track things, but keep the agreement the same. She nodded, bright as ever. "Of course." That week, a tax bill arrived, still addressed to Margaret. I held it a long time at my kitchen table, tracing her name with my thumb. Then I said it out loud in the quiet. "A bill isn't a deed. I filed it anyway. Paper belongs with paper." Evelyn Carter stopped me by the curb 2 mornings later. 72, treasurer of the HOA, walker of small, determined dogs. She wore a visor and the kind of smile people practice for church. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "just a reminder. We need notice for lock changes and big work orders." 24 hours is plenty." She tilted her chin toward the brick posts. "The gate camera records around the clock. Keeps the raccoons honest." I laughed because she wanted me to. "Thank you, ma'am," I said. "I'll pass that along." The rent kept landing. April, May. I sent Mark a photo of the receipts fanned out like playing cards. He sent a thumbs up, then another text. "We're good, Dad. Appreciate you." When I asked about lunch on Thursday, he replied on Friday night. When I asked about Sunday, he answered Monday. Busy week, he'd say, and it probably was, in the way young lives are. Sprints that pretend to be marathons. We ate together once in June. He talked about a project. Long hours, Rachel's Pinterest boards, a trip someday when money wasn't so tight. Rachel joined us halfway through and set her phone face down on the table the way people do when they want you to notice they're trying. "We've been reading about dead equity," she said, almost excited. "You know, freeing capital that just sits in walls. You could leverage this place so much better, Dad. People flip houses all the time. We're sitting on potential. It's a home," I said. "It also has a deed." "Sure," she said, cheerful. "But money has jobs. We could make it work for all of us." She squeezed Mark's hand as if the thought were a promise. He smiled at his plate. July's payment landed 2 days late with a note from Mark. "Car trouble. Sorry." August arrived on a Friday night. Time-stamped 11:58 p.m., like he'd raced a clock only he could see. I wrote the dates beside the receipts and tucked them behind the others. The folder grew a little thicker. My condo felt a little thinner. When I stopped by to drop a box of old photographs, Margaret in a red scarf. Mark at 6 with frosting on his face. There was a new rug and a box by the door with a smart lock printed on the side. "We'll install it after we clear it with the HOA, Rachel said. "We'll email Evelyn. We're being good neighbors." She said, neighbors the way people say, witnesses. I stood with Evelyn later that week while her dogs inspected a shrub. "Busy over there," she said, meaning my porch. "Young folks like to improve. Just have them send the notice, dear." She adjusted her visor. "Cameras catch everything. It's funny what people don't realize. She meant raccoons. We both knew she didn't only mean raccoons. The second Saturday of September, I made banana bread and left it on their counter with a note. Less sugar. Check at 18 minutes. I waited for a text that night, then the next morning. When Mark finally called, he sounded winded. Sorry, Dad, long day. Hey, about the rent. We were thinking maybe we could streamline. He let the word hang. I let the silence answer. A storm rolled through the next afternoon and left the air clean. I stood under the porch overhang and watched the street shine. Rachel's SUV pulled in. She waved, friendly as ever, then glanced at the gate as if measuring it. We'll get you off these little things, she said, tapping a stack of mail. It's silly for you to be stuck managing all this when we live here. Really? It's our house day to day. It's the family house, I said, and the agreement stands. Her smile thinned just enough to see. Families don't invoice families, she said softly. We'll figure it out. She lifted the mail and the top envelope slipped. Margaret's name looked up at us from the tax bill like a photograph someone had forgotten to put back in a frame. Rachel slid it under the stack. See? Even the county knows whose house it is. I didn't correct her on the curb. I don't argue with weather or with people performing for themselves. I drove home and laid everything on my table. Receipts, the tax bill, a printout of the HOA guidelines Evelyn had emailed without being asked. I opened Margaret's recipe book to the page with banana bread and pressed the paper flat. On Sunday, Mark came by alone. We stood by the gate like two men waiting for a thing to say itself. He rubbed his jaw the way he did at 13 when he'd done something he wasn't sure he could defend. He looked up, met my eyes, and finally let it come out in a voice that didn't wobble. Mom's house is ours, Dad. The 9th came and nothing landed. No ping on my phone. No polite note about a delay. Just a quiet day in a folder that didn't grow. I told myself to wait until evening, then until morning, as if time itself might wire funds. By Tuesday, I was doing math I haven't done since Mark was in grade school. Which bill can breathe for a week? Which can't? I sold the miter saw I swore I'd use again. The socket set Margaret gave me one Christmas. An old fishing reel that still smelled like the river. The cash covered my condo fee and a refill of blood pressure pills. It didn't cover the way my chest tightened in the pharmacy line when I saw a father with a boy picking out a candy bar, arguing good-naturedly about peanuts. I called Mark that night. He answered on the second try, voice clipped. Dad, I was going to text. It's been tight. We'll catch up next week. We had an agreement, I said. Simple words, no heat. 8 months on time. Now nothing, he exhaled. Frustration, not apology. It's Mom's house, he said, firmer, like last Sunday hadn't been a slip but a position. I mean, day to day it's our house, me and Rachel. It doesn't make sense to act like we're tenants. Tenants pay rent because they live in a place they don't own, I said. You live there. You don't own it. Mom's name is on everything, he shot back. The county bill still comes to her. You know that. A bill isn't a deed. I said it the way you say a true thing to a wind that's coming anyway. Silence. Then, we'll talk later. He hung up before I could set the tone. The next morning, a pale yellow notice was taped to my condo door. Past due, assessment reminder. I peeled it off, folded it once, slid it into my pocket so the hallway wouldn't read my business. In the elevator, a man from the 7th floor stepped in. Tall, late 60s, neat white hair, the bearing of someone who still irons the sleeves of his shirts. He looked at the paper in my hand, not nosy, just human. Those things always show up 2 days too early, he said with a half smile. Or 3 days too late, I said. He nodded at the folded corner where past due peeked out. Frank Morales, he said, offering a hand. 40 years in title. The boring kind of paper most people don't read. Sometimes one line in a deed changes everything. Henry, I said. I read paper. Good habit, he said as the elevator dinged. Especially when feelings start trying to overrule signatures. Back in my kitchen, I lined my receipts on the table. Months fanning like thin shingles. January through August, with dates penciled. July 3rd. August 9th. I wrote the word none where September should have been and underlined it once. Then I pulled the tax bill from the folder and set it beside the rest. Margaret's name stared up from the top like a familiar neighbor. I pressed my thumb over it and closed my eyes until the ache dulled. I reached for my pill bottle in the cupboard and knocked into Margaret's recipe book. It slid, thudded, opened, and something slipped free. A small cream envelope, unsealed, my name in her narrow hand. Henry. No extra words, no hearts. Margaret saved those for the margins of grocery lists. I sat down before I opened it, because I didn't trust my legs to take the weight of her handwriting. I held the flap and thought about all the things we had written down to keep ourselves honest. Paint colors, loan numbers, birth dates, the time the dentist actually wanted us there, not the time we wished it was. I slid a thumbnail under the paper and stopped. I put the envelope back between the pages at Banana Bread and closed the book. I wasn't ready to let her speak for me, not yet. I needed to hear my own voice first. I drove to the house and parked across the street. The porch light was on, though the sun was still high. Through the window, the new rug looked like a flag from a country I didn't belong to. Rachel came out with a bundle of flattened boxes. She saw me and lifted a hand. Friendly, practiced. "We're simplifying," she said across the hedge. "Getting our systems right. You know, streamlining." "Systems are only as good as the promises under them," I said. She tilted her head. "Families don't keep score, Henry. Families keep promises," I said. "Score takes care of itself." She pressed her lips together. Weighed a reply, decided to carry the boxes instead. That night, I ate toast and eggs and thought about Frank's sentence riding up and down with me. One line in a deed. I thought about Evelyn's visor at the curb and the camera she said, "Keeps the raccoons honest." I thought about Mark at 12, indignant about a bicycle rule he didn't write, and Margaret saying softly at the sink, "He'll learn the difference between wanting and owning. We'll write it down for him until he does." I put the folder in my bag. I printed the payments from my phone, every timestamp in black and white. I wrote a list. Recorder's office, landlord notice, language to be plain and exact. I laid a small metal plaque on the counter, its adhesive still covered. The text I had ordered stamped into it. 4 words and a numbers blank space waiting to be filled. When a man starts arguing with his son about who a roof belongs to, the house loses either way. I don't argue with roofs. I secure them. That night, I decided I wouldn't argue anymore. I would put it on record. Frank spread my folder on his kitchen table the way a careful man lays out tools before opening an engine. Receipts first, 8 clean months, dates penciled in my hand. The condo notice, the tax bill with Margaret's name, then the divider I hadn't touched in years. House, title. He lifted a plastic sleeve, slid out a copy of the deed Margaret and I had signed when we refinanced the last time. He tapped the paragraph most people skip. "Here," he said, nail on the line, "as joint tenants with right of survivorship, and not as tenants in common." He looked up. That phrase carries the roof. When Margaret passed, title went straight to you. No probate, no split. No Mum's house is ours. The house is yours. I read the sentence twice, not because I doubted him, but because I wanted to hear Margaret's planning voice inside the ink. She had written the groceries on paper bags when we forgot a list. She had made sure this sentence would outlive us both. I nodded. Then we put what already is where it can be found. The county recorder's office smells like old paper and floor wax, the way institutions used to. Frank knew the counter and the clerk by first name, which felt like cheating but wasn't. We filed the survivorship affidavit, verified the legal description, and requested certified copies. The clerk stamped and slid a receipt across. Instrument 2024, waiting 4317. Numbers as plain as fence posts. Frame it if you must, Frank said, smiling. But more important, make it easy to see. Back at my place, I typed the number onto a small metal plaque I'd ordered with room for exactly that. Beneath it, scan for recorded deed. I used a generator to make a QR that opened the public record to the instrument page, printed it on weatherproof film, and pressed it into the recessed square. The adhesive gave with a soft sigh. Paper became metal. Metal became notice. Then we wrote the piece of paper that has nothing to do with nostalgia and everything to do with promises. 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Frank dictated the bones in plain, English, dates owed, total amount, where to pay, and the agreement line, rent due under written arrangement, dated January 1st. I kept my pen steady. It felt less like anger than like winterizing a pipe. Simple prevention against bursting. Service? Frank asked. Proper, I said. By the book. He called a process server he trusted. I heard the calm efficiency in his voice and felt something uncoil in my chest. We weren't improvising. We were following a path Margaret would have underlined. I made coffee and opened my email to forward PDFs to Frank. A new message hovered at the top. FWD, HELOC ARV numbers. From Mark's account, forwarded by Rachel, CC'd to a string of addresses, and mine, by accident or habit. I clicked. A spreadsheet populated the screen. Columns labeled Purchase, 0, Current Value, After Repair Value, LTV, HELOC Draw. Notes in the margin, Rachel's voice without her smile. Paint, floors, kitchen, 28K. Once we're on title, we pull 120K. A second line. Dad will calm down. Families don't evict. I stared at the words until the coffee cooled. Then I printed the email and the sheet, slid them into the folder behind the rent receipts, and wrote one sentence on a sticky note. Money has jobs. Promises do too. I stuck it to the top of the process server's envelope. Late afternoon, I drove to the house with Frank riding shotgun, the plaque wrapped in a towel and the certified copy of the instrument number in my coat pocket. Evelyn was trimming a rosemary bush by the sidewalk, visor in place, dogs nosing the air like they'd been hired to approve. Afternoon, she said. If you're doing any lock work, just shoot the HOA a note. We'll be very tidy, I said. She glanced at the plaque in my hand and gave a small, satisfied nod, as if she liked a man who reads instructions. We fixed the plate to the inside face of the gate where any phone could see it but no truck could bump it. The screws bit, the metal sat flush, and the black square of the QR looked almost modest. I stepped back, opened my camera, and scanned. The recorder's page popped up with instrument JUC 2224, Y184317, and our names in the place the county puts facts. Frank checked his phone and said, That'll stop anyone who mistakes a feeling for a filing. On the hood of my car, I signed the last line of the 3-day notice. The process server texted, tomorrow 9:15 a.m. at premises. Frank tucked the documents into a stiff envelope and tapped it twice. Paper had weight again. On my way home, a shared calendar alert flashed across my phone from a family thread I'd forgotten to mute. Locksmith. Saturday, 9 a.m., I pulled over, let the car idle, and watched the little bell icon fade. On their calendar, a locksmith at 9 sharp, perfect. Saturday, 8:59 a.m. The truck eased to the curb, backup alarm ticking like a metronome, and a locksmith climbed down with a small case and a bigger sense of purpose. Mark stepped out first. Rachel followed, sunglasses on, a boxed smart lock tucked under her arm like a prize. Frank stood a few paces behind me, hands in his coat pockets. The posture of a man who's seen paper outlast tempers. They came straight for the gate. Rachel reached for the latch and stopped at the little metal square. 4 words and a black and white code. What is this? She said, already annoyed at whatever required reading. She lifted her phone. The HOA chime on the brick post made its soft tone. The camera's blue light winked awake. Evelyn, visor and small dogs, appeared halfway down the sidewalk as if she'd simply chosen that exact moment for a walk. Morning, she called, polite as a church usher. If locks are changing, please make sure the notice is filed. Her eyes flicked once to the camera, as if reminding it to do its job. Mark scanned. A page loaded. He squinted, then turned the screen toward Rachel. Instrument 2024-18437, legal description. Our names. One line most people skip, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Below that, the current vesting, plain as fence posts. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. This is ridiculous, she said, voice climbing. You're really going to play hardball with your own family? Charging your own sun rent? Heartless! The word came sharp, a little too loud, bouncing off brick. The camera chimed again, almost as if it had nodded. I kept my hands at my sides. You confused bills with the deed, I said. One tells you where to send money. The other tells you who owns the roof. The locksmith shifted his weight, eyes on Mark. "Do we proceed?" he asked, professional neutrality wobbling. Mark looked from the phone to the plaque to me. The bravado drained the way color does when a storm moves in front of the sun. He tried one more angle, tired more than angry. "Dad, we live here. It's Mom's house. It's ours day to day." "It was your mother's," I said, steady. "She put it in writing. Day to day doesn't change that." Footsteps on gravel. A man in a navy jacket with a small badge stepped through the open side gate, envelope in hand. "Mark Whitaker?" He said it as a question because the law is polite until it isn't. Mark nodded. Reflex. "Rachel?" She tipped her chin without taking off the sunglasses. "Service of process," the man said and handed each of them a copy. 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Amount due, address for payment, dates specified. Rachel took hers like it might stain. "We're not tenants," she snapped too quickly. "Notice says you are under a written arrangement dated January 1st, the man replied, not unkind. "Any questions are for the court." He glanced up at the plaque, then at his clipboard. "Have a good morning." He meant, go read. Evelyn, at the corner now, gave that small, contained smile women learn after 70 when they've seen enough to stop narrating it. "Please email the HOA before any locksmith work," she added gently, for the record. Her dogs sneezed in unison, as if to underline the point. The driver killed the truck's engine. The yard went quiet in that particular way neighborhoods do, when something private becomes public. Rachel stared at the phone screen like she could will the page to change. Mark ran a hand over the back of his neck and looked past me toward the porch where he'd once told me about a science fair. A bad haircut. A woman he hoped would say yes. "You could have just talked to us," he said. Soft now, the edge gone. "I did," I said. "I'm still talking. Paper keeps us from saying different things next week." Frank touched the brim of an imaginary hat to Evelyn and took a step back, giving the moment room to be what it was. "Recorded instruments are very persuasive listeners," he murmured, mostly for me. At the gate, they didn't move. The locksmith stared at his shoes. The QR glinted. The camera kept its quiet watch. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chime found the same note as my pulse and held it. They stalled at the gate, and I still had one more document in my pocket. Courtrooms have their own weather. Fluorescent light, low voices, the shuffle of paper like rain on a tin roof. Our case was called mid-morning. I stood at the plaintiff's table with my folder. Mark and Rachel took the other side. Frank sat a row behind me, hands folded over his hat like a man at church. Evelyn was there too, a neat notebook in her lap, HOA visor tucked away out of respect. "Mr. Whitaker," the judge said, even and unhurried, "what are you asking the court to do?" "Enforce what we wrote down," I said. "Order payment of rent in arrears under our written arrangement plus costs, or return of possession." "Begin with your proof," she said. I slid the receipts onto the rail, 8 months in a row. Dates penciled, January through August, and the written agreement we'd signed on New Year's Day. "They paid on time for 8 months," I said. "Then nothing in September. Text messages?" she asked. I handed up a stapled packet. Mark's tomorrow, his car trouble, and the line that had started this avalanche. "Mom's house is ours. Dad," the judge read, her face giving away nothing. "And the ownership?" she said, looking at me over her glasses. I held out the certified copy and a print from the county recorder's website. "Instrument number 2T24-184317, I said. "Margaret and I held title as joint tenants with right of survivorship. When she passed, title vested in me. The survivorship affidavit is recorded." She scanned the page, traced the vesting with her finger, and nodded once in that small way people do when facts line up with the ground. Rachel's turn came like a door swinging open too fast. "Your Honor, the county still sends the tax bill to Margaret," she said, voice bright with certainty. "All the utilities are in our names. We live there. Day to day, it's our house." The judge set the deed aside and folded her hands. "Ms. Hayes, a tax bill is for taxes. Utility accounts are for service. Neither determines title. The recorded deed determines title." She tapped the instrument number. "This is the owner of record," Rachel's mouth pressed into a line. Mark looked down at the table as if the wood might have a different answer. Anything else, Mr. Whitaker? The judge said, "Yes, Your Honor." I turned to Evelyn. She came forward, voice calm, and authenticated the HOA's curb camera and the rule about lock changes. We watched the clip on a small screen propped against the rail. The truck, the locksmith, Rachel lifting the smart lockbox, the soft chime as the camera woke, the QR plaque at the gate. Her voice came through clear. "Charging your own son rent? Heartless." The judge watched without expression, then noted the timestamp and the mention of a locksmith. "Thank you, Ms. Carter," she said. "That will be Exhibit D." I felt the weight of the last envelope in my pocket, the one more document I hadn't shown at the gate. I set it on the rail and slid out the printouts. "One more thing, Your Honor." A spreadsheet and an email appeared under the court's light. Hellock ARV numbers, columns for after repair value, LTV, draw. In the margin, Rachel's note in a crisp font. "Once we're on title, we pull $120K. Beneath it, Dad will calm down. Families don't evict." The room got quieter somehow. The judge read it twice. She didn't raise her voice when she spoke. She didn't need to. "This goes to intent," she said, more to the record than to us. "This is not a misunderstanding about a tax bill." Rachel stared straight ahead, jaw set. Mark turned to her, once quick, and I watched something inside him give way, like a beam that had been carrying more than its share. The judge stacked the exhibits in order: agreement, receipts, deed, notice, video, email. "Here is the court's ruling," she said. "Mr. Whitaker is the owner of record. The occupants are there under a written rental arrangement they honored for 8 months. September's rent is unpaid. The 3-day notice to pay rent or quit was properly served. The court orders payment of the arrearage and costs by the statutory deadline. Failing that, possession will be restored to Mr. Whitaker in accordance with procedure." She paused, letting the words rest where they landed. Then she looked at Mark. Not unkind, not indulgent. "Long-standing relationships don't change what a recorded title says," she said. "If you want different terms in a family arrangement, you write them, and you keep them." No one moved. A bailiff coughed softly, the sound of a page turning. I gathered my folder. Frank touched my shoulder with 2 fingers, a simple pressure that said, "Paper did its work." Evelyn slipped the visor back into her bag as if she were restoring an instrument. Rachel's phone vibrated against the table. A small insistent buzz that made no apology. Without looking at me or at Mark, she rose, tucked the device into her purse, and walked out of the courtroom with her eyes on the door as if it had been calling her all morning. Mark didn't follow. When the judge finished, her phone buzzed. She walked out without looking back, and he understood. Rachel didn't call. She didn't text. By the time I reached the courthouse steps, she was a clean absence, like a picture taken down, and the square of brighter paint left behind. Mark stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking smaller than a man his size should look. "I was wrong," he said, not dressing it up. "About the rent. About the house, about everything." The last word came out like someone setting a box down they'd carried too far. "I love you," I said, "and I forgive you. I let that live between us a beat. Forgiveness isn't a deed transfer. It's not a key." He nodded, eyes on the concrete. "I don't want the house." "Good," I said. "Because you're not getting it." I kept my voice even. "Here's what I can do. If you choose to stay until the deadline, you bring what's owed by the date the court set. All of it. If you can't, you move out on time and leave the place better than you found it. After that, you and I can talk about help, but nothing informal. No, we'll figure it out. Everything in writing. Dates, amounts, promises that don't need memory to stand," he swallowed. "I deserve worse, maybe," I said. "But I'm your father, not your judge." Frank joined us at the bottom of the steps, hat in his hands. "I know a yard foreman who needs a reliable pair of hands," he said to Mark. "Starts early, pays honestly. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest weight. I also know a property manager with a clean studio over on Maple. Month to month, market rate, no shortcuts. You'll sign a lease like anyone else. If you want those numbers, I'll make the call. If not, I'll keep them to myself." He let the offer sit without rescue. Mark looked from Frank to me. "I'll take the numbers," he said. "I'll sign whatever they put in front of me." You'll read it first, I said. Then you'll sign. That night, the condo felt less like a room and more like a harbor. I put the day's papers on the table and opened the recipe book where I'd tucked Margaret's envelope weeks ago. Henry in her hand. Steady, narrow letters, the cross of the H a line that never wavered. I sat before I slid my thumb under the flap. Her voice rose out of the paper, the way a known melody does from a radio in another room. If you are reading this, you've outlasted some storm without me. I can't hand you a new forecast, but I can hand you what we always used. Paper. I chose survivorship because I don't believe in love that needs tests. Not for roofs. Not for groceries. Not for Sundays. A roof is shelter, not leverage. If our son loves you, he will honor your roof and your rules. If he doesn't, he will learn. Either way, you will be protected without having to prove anything. I ran a finger along the margin, where she'd drawn a tiny square like a window. There was a list on the back, of course there was, dates we refinanced, the name of the clerk who had once misspelled Whitaker and apologized twice, the lot and block in a hand that treated numbers like friends. Beneath all that, a last paragraph that didn't scold, didn't beg, didn't ask me to be more gracious than I could afford, only told me the truth she'd already written into the deed. I folded the letter and slid it back into its envelope. I put the envelope in the folder with the receipts and the certified copies and the court's stamped order. The condo settled around me, quiet and sure. The next day I called Frank. "Make those introductions," I said. "And ask your property manager to bring a lease." I met Mark on Maple a day later. He read the lease, line by line. He signed it without flinching. He asked me if I'd co-sign. I told him no. I offered to be his first call if he had a question he could answer with work. He put the keys in his pocket like a man who knows what they cost now. That evening, I made coffee and laid Margaret's letter on the table one more time. The paper smelled faintly of flour, like the book it had slept inside. I didn't need to read it again. The one sentence I couldn't stop hearing had already found its place. One sentence from Margaret decided my next step. I didn't move back in. I called the broker I trusted, walked the rooms once more, my hand along the hallway paint we never got around to touching up, and signed the papers that would set the big house free of me and me of it. We priced it fair, not as a trophy, but as a roof that had done its job. Offers came steady. I chose a family who tripped on the same loose board by the pantry and laughed the way we used to. At closing, the pen felt heavy and right. I bought small on purpose. A one-story with a narrow porch and a gate you can open with a thumb push. Sun in the mornings, a strip of herbs by the kitchen window, a chair that earns its keep by being comfortable. No echo, no ghosts. Just a home size to the days I have. Mark didn't disappear. He texted the court deadline into his calendar, and on the morning it mattered, sent me a screenshot of a bank transfer that covered what the judge ordered. He moved out on time, left the house swept and the keys on the counter like a man who has learned that leaving well is part of living right. Frank's foreman put him on a crew. The property manager on Maple slid a lease across a desk. Mark read it line by line, asked 3 questions, and signed without reaching for me. When he paid his second month 2 days early, he sent no note and wanted no praise. That's how adulthood sounds. Evelyn came by my new place with lemon cookies wrapped in wax paper and the steady look of a woman who spent her life minding books and borders. We sat on the porch with tea. She admired the rosemary and told me her dogs approve of my fence. "Clean lines," she said. "And no cameras. Bless you." She didn't mention the clip or the word Rachel threw at the gate. She didn't have to. Some things are understood until they're not, and then they're written down so they don't have to be understood anymore. Frank showed up a day later, hat tilted back, the old metal plaque in his hand. He turned it over like a coin. "You keeping this?" he asked, grinning. "I was thinking paperweight," I said. He laughed. "Frame it if you must, but I prefer what you've done here." He gestured at the plain wooden gate. "No sign, no code, just slats and hinges and a latch. Sometimes the proof is knowing you could post one again and choosing not to." After they left, I unpacked the last box, the manila folder with receipts, the certified copies, the judge's order, and Margaret's envelope. I set the letter on the table and read it aloud into the quiet of my kitchen. because some words deserve air. If our son loves you, Margaret had written in her even hand, he will honor your roof and your rules. I could hear her say it, not as a test to set in front of a boy, but as a boundary to carry a man. She never liked exams that tricked you. She liked rules that protected you. We had written our marriage that way. Groceries, birthdays, gutters, deeds. When feelings flared, paper held. I slid her letter back into the envelope and put it in the drawer with the copy of my new deed. Not on a wall, not on a plaque, in a place I can reach without looking, where it waits with the other little proofs a life collects. A spare key, a rubber band, the porch light's extra bulb. The tools you use when the day insists. Mark visits on Sundays sometimes. We sit at my table and talk about his crew boss, his rent, a sandwich place he's discovered.
He doesn't ask for money.
I don't offer it. When he wants advice, he asks for it plainly, about a tool he's thinking of buying, about a nagging sound in his car. He brings over a sack of oranges once, eggs another time. He lets himself out and texts when he's home. We are learning a new language built from old words. Love, roof, rule, respect. We don't rush it. The family who bought the big place sent a postcard with 3 stick-figure kids drawn across the porch steps and a note on the back. We're making it ours, with care. I pinned it to my corkboard. You can be sentimental without being foolish. Toward evening, I walked out to my little gate and swung it open with my thumb. No metal square, no code. Just wood and sky and the straight line of a path. I stepped through, locked it behind me, and felt exactly as protected as a man is who trusts his documents and his decisions. Back inside, I slid the drawer shut on the deed and the letter. The house held still around me, doing the quiet work roofs do, keeping what matters in, letting the rest weather somewhere else. Love is love. Property is an agreement. Both only last when there's respect.